Folks at home, welcome back to the Crimson Oak Pond, home of these aggressive tiger bass. And I'm excited because today we're going to be doing a DNA genetic test on a lot of the bass here in this pond by taking a small fin clip off of these fish, putting it in one of these tubes, and then sending it off to the lab for testing. And one of the reasons for doing this genetic testing is this pond is now 3 years old, so a lot of the data and information we get from these reports will help us make decisions about how to manage this pond in the upcoming years. And I can't wait to see what genetics the world's most aggressive bass that we call Moby has. But there have been a lot of advancements in the last 10 years for genetic testing, especially when it comes to fish. And it's also gotten cheaper, allowing more people to do it. But now that fisheries biologists have data on hundreds of thousands of bass, they've started noticing these trophy markers, and that's a common genetic that all of these big bass have. So for each bass that we sample, we're going to get 3 different types of data. The first is what strain they are, for instance, what percentage of Florida versus northern strain they are. And the second is trophy probability, as they look for those trophy markers in each fish. And the third is relatedness and diversity. So how many of these fish are related or siblings, and how many different strains of bass we have here in the pond. But the first one I want to talk about is trophy probability. So the biologists at Red Hills have now identified 12 markers that are a good indication of whether or not that fish has a true trophy potential. And I find that fascinating because now you can take samples from these small, newly hatched bass and have a good idea of which ones will make it to that 10-pound or bigger category. And one reason I could see this being a valuable tool for us is because each year we have to remove around 20 pounds of bass per acre, and we're removing a lot of 2 to 3 pound bass. Well, now if we know which of these bass has that potential to get really big, we can keep those fish and remove the other ones that are the exact same size, but without that potential. But I'll also have to point out the fact that just because a fish has good genetics and the potential to become really big doesn't necessarily mean that's going to happen, because genetics are only part of the equation. These fish also have to have an abundance of forage food to get that big, as well as good water quality. So basically bass are just like deer, horses, and cattle when it comes to genetics. For example, a whitetail buck could have the best genetics ever, but if he doesn't have enough food and protein, he'll never reach his full potential when it comes to antler growth. So that's why we've always kept this pond stocked with a variety of different bait to help those fish reach their potential, and if you combine that with good water quality, then you should start seeing some big healthy fish. But this 5-acre pond is a perfect example because when we first stocked the pond, all of the bass were the same size, about 2.5 to 3 inches long, and some of them had good genetics and grew up to be 8-pounders, while others are stuck in that 2 to 3 pound range. Now the next thing I'm really interested to see from these reports is the strain of bass. So we stocked this pond with a tiger bass, which is a 50-50 split between a northern largemouth bass and a pure Florida bass. And so any of the first generation of bass that we test should be roughly 50-50. But I'm interested to see the numbers on those second and third generations, because when you breed a pure Florida with a pure northern bass, the offspring get the best traits from each parent. But when you breed a hybrid with another hybrid, sometimes you lose some of those preferred traits like aggression and growth rates. And if you guys recall, 2 years ago we stocked 6 100% pure Florida strain largemouths, and the goal was to have some of these big females spawn with the tiger bass, which would allow future generations of bass in this pond to have better genetics. And a pure 100% Florida strain bass grows bigger than any other strain, but there's been a lot of debate about their catchability. So a lot of pond owners want to have big bass, but they also want to have big bass that they can catch. And I kind of agree, there's no point in having a 10-pound bass in a pond that you can never catch. But some of the data that we're collecting with our pit tags is showing that some of these ideas aren't necessarily true. For instance, one of the 100% Florida strain bass we put in, named Okeechobee, has already been caught 5 times in less than 2 years, making it one of the most aggressive bass in the pond. So putting pure Florida bass in a pond could also result in big, aggressive bass. But another thing I've always been interested in is the lifespan of the different strains of bass. For instance, most bass live 10 to 15 years, but some data suggests that the northern strain lives longer because they're slower growing, and while these bass in the south have rapid growth, their lifespan isn't quite as long. But some of our pet bass like Moby are getting on up there in age, as he's about to have his 8th birthday. Happy birthday, Moby. And then the last thing we're going to learn from these reports are the relatedness and diversity of the fish. So these genetic tests can tell how many of these fish are siblings, half-siblings, cousins, or completely unrelated. And like I mentioned earlier, it's good to have some diversity so that your hybrids don't continue spawning with other hybrids, but rather introducing some pure strains to help those genetics. But just for instance, the bass that are living in the pond we call Cedar Falls, we have Tiger, which is a 1st-generation bass, Johnny and June are 2nd-generation bass, and then Johnny and June also had the first successful spawn in that pond, and that brought us Eve, which is a 3rd-generation bass. And if you missed the last video, we just had another spawn So now we have some bass fingerlings in there that are 4th generation. And who knows, Moby may have spread some of his genetics in there. But the best part about this genetic testing is it's going to give us more information, and just like always, the more information you have, the better decisions you can make. And the best part about having this Cedar Falls pond is it solves 2 parts of the equation, the water quality and the food. Because as you've seen over the past years, we stock 1,000 golden shiners in here every week, so these bass have an abundance of forage to eat, and with the wetland filter, waterfall, and aqua blocks, these fish have really good water quality, which basically just means that every fish in here can meet their genetic potential. Alright, so now that we know what kind of information we're going to learn from these reports, it's time to go get some fin clips and sample some bass. So we got our package in from the Red Hills Fishery, and it comes with a box that has all of our test tubes in it, as well as a pair of scissors and tweezers. And today we're going to be sampling 12 different bass, and since I had so many fish to catch, I decided to bring the heavy hitter, Liz, out here, and she said that'll be light work. She's got the chatterbait tied on and ready to go. Alright, time to get started taking samples. We've got our Bama Bass Pit Tag Reader Kit, so we're going to scan each one of the bass that we catch and get its pit tag number so we can record it in the database with the sample. And after talking to the biologist, the best place to get a tissue sample is from the top of the tail, because their tails are fast growing and will grow back in 2 to 3 weeks. But the best part is you can get all of the genetic information from a small sample about the size of your pinky fingernail. There he is. Right at the bank. Alright, got our first sample. Alright, this fish has been caught, 570025. Alright, this fish weighs 2.13 pounds and is 15.5 inches. But you can see we take the sample right there off the tip of the tail. It'll grow right back in no time. Alright, this fish is named Maverick, and we haven't caught him since 2023. He's one of the original 1st generation bass that we stocked in the pond, and is a male that only weighs a little over 2 pounds, but he does have a relative weight of 105%, which isn't bad. And he's pretty much been living out here by the diffuser since 2023. Alright, Liz got one. It's another nice one. Alright, another fish that's been caught, 569705. There it is. Alright, this fish is 16.5 inches and weighs 2.31 pounds. Alright, this fish is named Turbo and another 1st generation bass. These originals are showing up today for this testing, but we hadn't caught Turbo in over a year and another male bass in that 2 pound range. Alright, Liz on back-to-back cast. She's back to her old ways where I can't even make a cast before she's already got another one in here. Alright, this fish has been caught, 570499, weighing in at 2.68 pounds, 16 inches long. Alright, now this fish is named Viking and is most likely a 2nd generation bass. It's got some decent growth rates and 119% relative weight, which is good. There we go. It feels pretty good. Oh, he's running in the tree. Oh, yeah. Good one. Oh, no. Oh, no. He's got me right up in the tree. Man, that was luck. Pure luck there. Big head, but not a huge body. This should be one of the original bass we stocked. Its pit tag is 570730, and it weighs 3.02 pounds and is 18 inches long. Alright, this fish is named Elvis, another 1st generation bass. And Elvis was a little shy in the beginning, but we've started catching him a lot here recently. But you can tell with that bigger head and smaller frame, and that relative weight of 92%, Elvis isn't one of the fastest growers. There we go. Little guy. It's a healthy fish though. Got that football shape. 33163. Alright, this fish weighs 2.38 pounds. It's 15.5 inches. Alright, this fish is named Zebco and a 3rd generation bass. And somehow we made the mistake of putting 2 pit tags in this fish. But luckily we got them both documented. And Elvis is in pretty good shape at 117% relative weight. And we've basically caught him right here in the corner of the dam every time. So another fish that doesn't travel around much and likes anything that resembles a minnow. And now let's head back over to the shop, and with all of this equipment we use at the farm, you can imagine how high our gas and fuel bill is, and that's why I use Upside. Upside is a free app that gets you cash back on gas, groceries, and dining, the three things I spend the most money on. And they currently have over 100,000 participating locations, so every time I'm ready to gas up, I open up the app, find a location nearby, claim the offer, and pay with a card like normal. And as you can see, today at Love's I earned 41 cents per gallon cash back. And that's the best part about this, is it's not points or credits that expire, it's money you transfer straight to your bank account. But it's not just for gas, you can use it for groceries or dining at participating locations. And today we used it for 34% cash back at Jimmy John's. And Upside has given back $1 billion to its users. So to find out how much you could earn, download the free Upside app and use promo code BAMABASS to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas using promo code BAMABASS. I use Upside, and you should too. There he is. That's pretty good. Running at us. Man, he's fighting. Oh, another little chunky one. Alright, this fish has been caught, 571193, weighing in at 2.11 pounds. Alright, this fish is named Ripley, most likely a second generation bass, and probably got another male on her hands, 104% relative weight, which isn't bad. Oh yeah. Liz got her one. You got a good one? Yeah, it's a good one. Pull, pull, pull. Get
He's on.
All right. Look at there, Liz. You got a chunky one. You got football belly. All right, this fish has been caught. 327, weighing in at 3.02 pounds. All right, this fish is named Kilo, a second generation bass. And I'll be interested to see if Kilo has any trophy markers, because he gained right at a pound in 6 months, which would put him at 2 pounds a year, which is pretty good growth for a largemouth. And that's one of the higher relative weights we've seen at 122%. And if you look at those locations, typically these bigger female bass hang out around the feeders because they like to pick off those easy targets. Got him. I was watching that. She pulled him right off that little brush pile out there. Oh, another big one. She got her little hot spot right over here. Yes, sir. Eating the chatterbait. All right, this fish has been caught, 569638, weighing 2.66 pounds. Now this fish is named Bertha, and unfortunately Bertha's probably a male, but was also one of the first generation 2-inch bass that we put in the pond. And although it's got a decent relative weight, it's only 2.66 pounds, which is pretty much what you'd expect to see from a male bass. But if you look at Kilo and Bertha, that's a perfect comparison because both of these fish were caught back in July of 2025, and Kilo gained right at a pound over those 6 months, while Bertha gained right at half a pound over those 6 months. So Kilo's growing about twice as fast as Bertha. Alright, now it's time to head over to Cedar Falls and get a fin clip from one of the most aggressive bass in the world named Moby. And to explain why I'm so interested in this, I have to take you back to the very beginning, where we caught Moby on the Mobile Delta, back in one of the swampiest, remote places I've ever fished. And what's interesting is we were actually crappie fishing, and I was really surprised to catch Moby because he was only a little bit bigger than the minnow he was trying to eat. But I knew with that type of aggression, we'd want to keep this little guy around. So we brought him home and put him in our 50-gallon planted aquarium, and that's where we saw the biggest appetite of a bass that we had ever seen. Moby ate so much that we had to get an additional 10-gallon aquarium and keep it stocked full of bait fish because he never stopped eating. Every time you walked by, you could see that expression, and he'd wiggle that tail and say, "Feed me." And we also learned that Moby was an acrobat and would leap out of the water after a worm. And I'll never forget the day that he jumped so high, he actually landed outside of the aquarium. And even after about a 3-foot fall, we put him back into the tank, and he acted like nothing happened and was looking for more food. When your appetite trumps even your own health, you know you got a problem. But even as a little bass, Moby was relentless and wouldn't back down from anything, no matter what the size or how big the pinchers were. But he ate so much that he eventually outgrew that aquarium, so we moved him over to the 300-gallon aquarium, where he immediately swam over to the biggest bluegill in there, sizing him up and seeing if he could eat him. I literally can't put my hand up here without him smashing it. I hate sticking my thumb down in there every time. That is insane. Moby, you are too much, buddy. Alright, now we're over here at Cedar Falls, gonna try to get a fin clip off of Moby, but I'm not quite sure how we're gonna catch him. See, typically I might be able to net him, but since we had that cold front move through, they're all out there in the deepest water. So I'm definitely can't get a net out there down deep. They're all sitting right in that area. But I'm pretty sure I see Moby. He's actually closest to us, so I'm gonna drop the same fishing lure down in there and see if he'll bite it. Alright, can't say I've ever done this. Fish for my pets. There's Moby right there. Let's see if he wants to bite it. Oh, we got one of them. I believe that's old Johnny boy. Man, he's pretty. Got some beautiful colors. Look at that. Alright, even though this isn't Moby, we're going to go ahead and get a tail sample and see what kind of information we get from Johnny. 1749. Man, what a beauty of a fish. Just took a little tip end of his tail. Alright, Johnny weighs 4.16 pounds. Alright, since we just got some current measurements, I had to go back and find the footage of when we first caught Johnny, and I caught him on a little rooster tail right after the first spawn, tiny compared to what he is now. Alright, little buddy, I'm gonna put you out right here by your fish cave. But Johnny and June were the first bass we ever put into Cedar Falls, and they instantly became a duo and followed each other around the pond. But Johnny has some pretty good statistics. He's gained 4 pounds in a little over 2 years, which puts him right at 2 pounds a year, which is really good for a largemouth bass. And you can see his relative weight is 139%, which is on up there. So that just goes to show that with the right water quality and an abundance of food, and go from looking like this to this. Wow, that's pretty incredible. Alright, so at this point I had a tough decision. I didn't want to keep catching fish out of this pond with a rod and reel, just hoping to eventually catch Moby. So I decided to hold off on testing Moby until the water gets a little warmer and I can get him out of there with a net. But if getting a genetic test done on Moby is something you guys would like to see, leave a comment down below, and if I see enough interest, I may even get down in the freezing water with a net in the next video so we can get that sample. Alright, so now that we've gotten all the fin clips, I'm boxing everything up, getting it ready to send out to the lab, and hopefully I'll have the reports back and give you all the information we learned in the next video. So just like the rest of the country, we've had some pretty crazy weather lately, but I never expected to see this, an osprey out hunting during a downpour. His chances of success have to go way down, and I'm surprised he can even see anything with all the raindrops bouncing off the water. But I give this guy an A for effort. He might be worried that the ponds are about to freeze over, so he's trying to catch everything while he can. So living in the South, humidity is just one of those things we deal with year-round, but I've never seen it as bad as it was after that storm. We had a sheet of water droplets covering the fish tank, TVs, and refrigerator here inside the shop, and I checked the humidity earlier and it was 97%. I've never seen it that high before, especially here in January. But I went out to Cedar Falls to check on things the next morning after the freeze, and luckily nothing had frozen over. But we did have an issue over here at the 5-acre pond, so I noticed that 2 of my diffusers were not producing bubbles. And when I checked on the air compressor, it was still running, and the diffuser up there in the shallow water was still working. So my guess is we got some water in the air lines for those 2 deeper units, and it froze up, so now it's just a waiting game until we can get some more bubbles. But this is the weekly trend of the water temps at the 5-acre pond, and you can see we're finally getting down into the low 50s and high 40s, which is not good news for the tilapia. And just a few weeks ago, the water temps were up in the 70s. Man, we've had some big swings this year. Alright, now let's go check in on the 2 alligator gar that we named Garfield and Odie. So they're hanging out on opposite ends of the tank right now, but have been getting along pretty good. And I wanted to add some aquatic plants because gar like cover and structure much more than they do open water. So we floated the plants under the light for a day, then we gave them a hydrogen peroxide bath to get rid of all the algae and bugs. Then we got the plants added to the aquarium, and you can see I picked some vertical plants that are going to grow tall and upright and give those gars some places to hide. But now it's feeding time, and believe it or not, even with these colder temps, there's still a lot of small bait fish right here in the shallow parts of the pond. So after a couple of scoops of the net, we got a big variety of bait. And with these colder temps, they don't acclimate as well, but I don't think the gar are going to mind at all. So we're starting to see 2 different personalities in the gar, and the one that we call Garfield is much more active and seems a little more aggressive, because anytime we put some bait in, he's up there after him, while Odie just sits down there on the bottom and waits for him to come to him. But I'm learning that feeding time isn't so easy with gar like it is with all the other fish, because with bass you just dump the shiners in and they devour them. But because of the physical characteristics of a gar and having that long snout, sometimes catching their food isn't so easy. And these little guys are learning. As you can see, Garfield swims past the minnow, then has to back up as he tries to get his snout aligned. And after all that, he goes in for that vicious bite and completely misses. So it's been a little bit of a learning process, but they're eventually catching them. And if you saw in the last video, we're also trying some tilapia fillets, where I cut a fillet into small pieces and then basically hand feed them with tongs. And that's been the best way to feed them so far, but I don't want them to get completely dependent on me, just in case they enter a pond here in the future. So I'm trying to help them develop those hunting skills along the way. And I also got them a heater installed in the tank last week, and they've been a lot more active with these warmer water temps. And now that this cold weather kicked off the rut here in Alabama, I decided to go sit up in a tree stand and film some of these bucks. Now, I don't do any hunting out here because these are more like my pets, but it is exciting whenever you get close to them. And as you can see, there's a nice scrape on the ground right there that lets you know those bucks have been using this area. So I put a camera right there to see who was coming out, and a nice buck stops by every night and smells the tree limbs above it, then hooks them with his antlers. And then when he's finished, he paws at the scrape to refresh it. And I really like that sage or broom's hedge that's been growing right here in these areas. If we can get enough of it, it makes a perfect habitat for quail. But the first activity we saw was one of the egrets, as he was doing a little hunting over there in one of the shallow parts of the pond, until another one showed up and they had a little turf war. And I'll have to admit, I got pretty excited when I heard some steps coming through the woods. But as it got closer, I realized it was just a big armadillo. And check this guy out. He has rooted and rubbed his nose so much on the ground that he's actually rubbed the color off of his snout. That guy's been busy, but it's pretty common to see them around, especially this time of year. So we had the first deer show up down there at the old oak tree. You can even see the squirrel house from here. And it looked like it was a mama and a couple little ones. And I'm not sure if those small deer were playing with Foxy, because he's been hanging out there in that area a lot, but they were getting excited about something. And they're even getting a little rowdy here late in the afternoon. And right here before dark, pretty much anywhere you looked around the field, you would see deer. And with that many does in the area, I knew it was just a matter of time before we started seeing some bucks show up. And we did have the first buck show up after that, but it was just a little spike. And a mama and some more twins showed up, playing out in the field just like the others. And I knew it wouldn't be long before one of the bigger bucks came out to play. So when he first showed up, he came out into the middle of the field to check on the three does. And he showed a little bit of interest in them, but then if you notice, there was another buck hanging out back behind him. I believe it was that spike we saw just a moment ago. And he kept turning around looking back that way, and I thought that he was a little aggravated that another buck was so close to him. And then he turned around, and I was expecting him to go run the little buck off. But then I was a little surprised because it wasn't the little buck that he was after all along. He trotted right past him and must have seen something over there on the wood line that caught his interest. And you can see he's comfortable out here by the way that tail's wagging. And he's really intrigued by something. And I never did get to see what it was. My guess is that it was a doe over there that caught his eye. And he eventually trotted off over there to go find it. And that ended up being the only nice buck that showed up this afternoon. But we did have a nice herd of does and small ones out here. And even had one come up right beneath the stand right at dark. But you know that those old nannies have such a good nose. And I think she smelled me with that trail right there where I walked in. And she wasn't sure what to think about me when I got down out of the stand. And then she said, "I'm out of here." But I also wanted to ask some of you guys that use these game cameras if you think that the deer are bothered by the cameras. Because I'm not sure if they make a sound or if they put off something that the deer can detect. But all year long I've had several deer get spooked by them. It's nothing major, they usually just bounce back a couple of steps. But I feel pretty confident they know that they're there. So let me know in a comment down below if that's something you guys have seen also. But while we're down here in the swamp, let's check in on all the animals. We got the raccoon doing a tightrope walk over the old fallen cedar tree. And some more rutting activity as the bucks chase the does across the creek. This one circled back around and has that white tail bouncing up in the air. And we even have a raccoon climbing the tree on the left. And check that out, I thought we were about to get to see the bobcat jump over the creek, but I guess he thought it was a little too far to jump and decided to cross somewhere else. And I'm always surprised whenever I see a blue heron down here, and I know they're basically just hunting for small fish like they do in the pond. It just seems like the pond has a lot less predators like the bobcat hanging out around it. Another nice buck hot on the trail, following the same path that doe came through earlier. Mr. Raccoon heading into work. And a young buck out on day patrol. Man, that looks like a tired doe that's been chased around. And you can probably see why. The old spike trailing not too far behind her. And the raccoon heading back home after a long night at work. And we got Peter Cottontail out here bouncing around. And another buck crossing over the creek. Man, this one looks like he has been fighting. He's lost about half of his rack on one side and maybe some on the other. Here's another doe getting chased across the creek. And half rack's hot on the trail. But this is what happens this time of year whenever they're chasing, especially down here in the swamp. Unfortunately, that mud's not too easy on their ankles. And there's the big old armadillo, making his rounds. But if you missed the last video, I'm happy to say that the fox squirrel that we call Foxy has made this area down here by the old oak tree its new home. I love how he stands up on his back two legs to look around for danger. But so far he's been getting along with everybody. The hawks and owls and eagles hadn't messed with him. I've been a little worried about that since he's right out here in the open now. So let's check in on that rub camera one more time. Got another nice buck coming through, and you can see he stops because he notices the camera. But it doesn't bother him enough to make him run off. And Mr. Fox is coming through, and watch him smell around until eventually something spooks him. Not sure what kind of scent would bother him that much. And here's another prime example of a nice buck coming through, head down, focused on that scrape, and then somehow the camera startles him, and he bounces off. There's something strange about that, but there's one thing that's for sure, is no camera's going to keep these bucks from rutting, as he's hot on the trail. And I think we got our little Spike back out here chasing again. And he's full of energy. Man, look at the neck on that buck during the rut. And there we have Peter sitting right on top of the scrape. And we got George Jones the possum and his lady coming through. And another young buck stopping by the scrape to smell the branches. So this time of year I've been seeing a lot more of the bucks getting down in the pond to help them cool off. And this buck is debating whether he keeps eating or chases the doe. And he decides to chase the doe. And they do a big circle and end up right back here in the same spot. And hey, we have Flip Flop, the floppy-eared deer that's always got her ears pinned back. And George out here all fluffed up on this nice cold morning. And here's a cool shot of a buck chasing a doe, and all the other does that aren't in heat laying down. And probably thinking, man, I'm glad that's not me right now. And even the young bucks are out here rutting too. And the deer and raccoons are having a stare down. And another buck chasing a doe off, and the raccoons don't know what to think about it. And there's a really good look at Flip Flop. You can see both of those ears are just stuck like that. Alright, now it's tree planting time. Every year in the wintertime when the trees are dormant, I try to plant as many of them as I can out here at the farm. And we got a new type of oak tree that we're planting this year called a willow oak. They're considered a fast-growing oak tree, but not quite as fast as the nut-all. We also have a couple of bald cypress trees we're going to plant. But for these oak trees, they have a long, skinnier leaf that also turns that nice red color during the fall. And you can't see these trees during most of the aerial drone shots that I put out. So a lot of times people will comment and say you should plant some trees around the pond. Well, as you can see here, we got them lined around the entire pond and even out all the way across the field. But unfortunately, trees just take a little while to grow and become substantial. And we've currently planted over 3,000 trees out here at the farm since we bought it, with the majority of those being longleaf pines. And the problem with them is they grow down before they grow up. So most of these pines are 3 years old now, and we're just now starting to see some of them come out of that grass stage and sprout up. There's a good looking one that's probably the tallest one we have out here so far. But the reason that longleafs are good is because they have a substantial root system, which is what we needed for all the hurricanes that we get in this area. And here's a bald cypress tree we planted a couple years ago that's growing pretty good. And they'll do that if you can keep the deer off of them long enough. You can see while these bucks are rutting, they can do some damage. And these younger oak trees that we just planted wouldn't be able to hold up to those bucks rubbing on the tree limbs. So for each of these, we drove a stake down in the ground and put a fence around the perimeter of it, and we'll keep that there until they get big enough so that the deer can't hurt them. But we're going to continue to add trees every year, especially these nut-bearing trees and other varieties that are going to benefit the wildlife. And check that out, this tree hadn't been planted 30 minutes and a little group of birds already flew in here. using it as their new perch. That's what I like to see. But speaking of birds, let's check on the backyard pond where we have a big variety of them. We got the geese flying through, and we've been setting up a charcuterie board for the birds. And this is about as close up of a shot as you can get of a bird as he's cracking those sunflower seeds. And so far I've noticed they prefer the seeds the most. And the squirrels usually end up eating the peanuts. And the fruit and that bird ball right there in the center will end up getting tackled last. Alright, if you made it this far in the video, make sure to hit that subscribe button to follow along with the 5-acre pond, tiger bass, and all the wildlife out here at the farm. But I hope you all enjoyed this one, and we will see you all next time.